Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Дорогие друзья, günaydın, cari amici. It's a great pleasure to continue the interesting discussion from the plenary opening session, now with already a dedicated topic, which resonates very well with the motto of this year's forum: New Energy for New Economic Realities. And the first session indeed is about energy, about the new reality of energy cooperation, innovative strategies for global progress. And I'm very glad that we will have the opportunity to discuss this immensely important topic with a very distinguished panel, which comprises Leonid Mikhelson, Chairman of the Board and Member of the Board of Directors, Novatek; Kirill, Komarov, First Deputy General Director and Director of Development and International Business Unit, Rosatom State Atomic Energy Corporation; Şahin, Yaman, Lecturer, former WTO Negotiator, Chief Counsellor of Turkiye at the Turkish mission to the WTO organization in Geneva, and today lecturer at the Middle Eastern Technical University; and Konstantin, Simonov, CEO of the National Energy Security Fund. We're having this discussion at a very interesting moment, ladies and gentlemen, where the old paradigms of energy are being fundamentally re-evaluated. As the participants of the opening session said, energy policymaking and the energy discussions evolve around three paradigms: affordability, reliability or security, and sustainability. And until very recently, it seemed that this path to the energy future is one which is dictated mainly by the transition to a green economy and green energy production. And the only question that was open was a question how fast and by which time we would get into this future. But now we are re-evaluating and at the same time obviously continuing certain of the transition processes that have been started before. If we look at what is happening in the energy sector in 2025, we see very interesting trends. We see that energy demand continues to rise globally. Energy demand is driven by mainly a rise in electricity consumption. Electricity consumption which is linked to electrification of industrial and transport, electricity demand and consumption which is also linked to increasing demand for global data and server centers, and by growing demand, especially in emerging and developing markets. At the same time, we see an interesting situation where now the lion's share of growth in energy supply is generated on the side of renewables, including atomic energy. We also see that demand continues to grow for traditional energy resources, fossil fuels, and here natural gas is the clear leader. And we also see that demand is recovering in traditional economies. So even in Europe, in the United States, energy consumption and production is currently on the rise. Now this is the stage where we will have this discussion today, and I would now like to give the floor to the first speaker, and for this I switch to Russian. For the translator it will be a bit difficult because part of the moderation will be in Russian, part of the moderation will be in English. Очень рад сейчас
Well, it is my pleasure now to address our first honorable speaker, and this is Mr. Mikhelson, Chairman of the Board at Novatek. Mr. Mikhelson, I do believe you are in a unique position and you have a unique experience to answer to the questions that I've just raised. Indeed, you've spent most of your professional life in oil and gas industry, literally all of your professional life. And for 2 decades now, you've been heading Novatek, being the chairman of the board. At the same time, you've been at the forefront in many other areas, be that educational initiatives. You are the co-founder of a skull cover project. And I would like to ask you the following question. Over the past decade, the world energy market has been through a number of challenges. All the way from 2016 to 2020, it felt like the future of the world energy would be defined by the green agenda only. And the only question was how quick this transition is going to happen. However, today we see that there is a whole era of energy cooperation between Europe and Russia is at least temporarily suspended, since we see that there is no more Russian gas pipeline coming to the market. Nonetheless, virtually a quarter of the world energy mix accounts for natural gas, and more than half of natural gas is an LNG market. So it's quite obvious that the interests of all the gas market players are tied in a single plan of cooperation. However, there is no unified plan available. There are too many open matters and the positions of the market players are too far apart. Nonetheless, my question is, what are the realities of today that we need to pay particular attention to so that the current destabilization of the market is not growing into yet another prolonged energy crisis? And the future has shown us that energy crises are always accumulated by global crises. If there is a way to avoid it, if there is, we definitely should strive for it. Now, Mr. Mikhelson, the floor is yours. Feel free to be seated or come up to the microphone.
Please. Dear participants in the forum, thank you for the question. The topic is very important. Last year, LNG consumption reached around 405 million tons, and you were absolutely correct to say that today it accounts for more than half of the global gas trade. On average, the LNG market is usually growing at 2% per annum, but because of the spike that Europe had this year, the forecast for this year is at around 4% instead. Europe will grow at around 4%, and it will consume an additional 20 million tons. By the way, the United States will have increased their exports this year by a smaller amount, by something like 17 million tons. This is why, if the EU were to continue increasing their demand at the same pace, no one would be able to guarantee that even new American projects would cover that. The contracting structure is now changing. Instead of long-term contracts, customers now opt for flexible supply terms, almost the same as in the oil market. For example, the Europeans sourced almost all of their additional volumes this year with spot contracts. LNG projects are no longer 100% linked to consumption regions. The market has become a global one. For example, the European Union included the phase-out of Russian LNG in 2027 in its 19th sanctions package, and Russia currently accounts for more than 10% of the global LNG production. These volumes would simply find home in other markets. Excluding them from the global gas balance is simply impossible. Prices would skyrocket. In this case, most of the brunt will be borne by the European customer. One needs to recall 2022. By the way, back then, the prices went up as high as $35 per MMBTU back then. That's why we believe that the most important thing today is to maintain the energy balance and avoid the crisis. To do that, one needs to realistically understand the future demand and supply potential. Speaking in the Moscow Forum 2 weeks ago, OPEC Secretary General said that by 2050, the global economy would double. One could dispute the year, but everybody would probably share this estimate. So how could one cover this future demand with zero carbon energy? Oil, gas and coal projects that today account for 86% of the energy mix will receive around 1.1 trillion US dollars in investment this year. Clean energy, nuclear, hydro and renewables that only take up 14% of the energy mix will receive twice as much, $2.2 trillion. Continuing like this, with this proportion, is not possible. The hydrocarbons resource base is no longer capable of supplying the world with cheap fuel, while the drastically disproportionate amount of investment flows into the renewables. One needs to resume investing in oil and gas. Even the International Energy Agency is saying that investment is required today to replenish resource base. But then let's take a look at France as an example. Feels like they fail to realize this today. We have this long-standing engineering partner, Technip of France, and there's only a handful of companies like them that can engineer and build LNG plants. They have approached state-owned banks for financial support for their new projects, but they hear no. There's a law that says that hydrocarbon projects, LNG, can no longer be financed. At the same time, their neighbor Germany has announced that by 2030 they will need to commission 20 gigawatt worth of gas-fired power plants. These facilities alone will consume around 15 million tons of LNG. All analysts recognize today that the demand for hydrocarbons would only grow. The world consumes a little bit more than 4 trillion cubic meters of gas today. By 2050, this amount will be at least 5 trillion. And this is a conservative estimate. That's why the question, how do we limit gas, is something that's said less and less frequently. And more we hear of, how do we cover this demand? What does the IEA, the International Energy Agency, say to this? Almost all of the world's gas, around 90%, is currently produced in fields facing decline in production. The resource-based structure is changing. Around 30% of the gas today is coming from shale fields. We're in Turkey, and this year it will have consumed around 60 billion cubic meters, and the minister spoke about that earlier today and mentioned that they invested in exploration. They did this unique piece of a job, and they discovered a field which would be enough to cover something like 10% of the country's gas demand. We're speaking about billions of cubic meters, while the need runs into trillions. And a potential for major discoveries is no longer out there. The LNG market is forecast to grow from the current 405 million tons to 720 million tons by 2050. This means that the market will need an additional 300 million tons of LNG per annum over the next 2 decades. I apologize. The resources and reserves to cover this can only come from Qatar, the United States and Russia. Qatar has made a decision to make a large-scale expansion of their facilities and add something like 50 million tons. then the resource base is available in the United States. There's a huge resource base, but these are shale fields that require almost continuous development efforts. By the way, that's why the LNG production price is at around $6 to $7. At the same time, their potential is not unlimited. One needs to bear in mind their domestic demand. They say that in the next decade, the US data centers alone would require an additional 100 billion cubic meters of gas. Will this leave the spare capacity for export projects? Well, let's say the US increases their production by another 100 million. So together with Qatar, they will bring 150 million tons. Still, 150 million more is necessary. Where can this come from? The Arctic. It holds a quarter of proved and a third of yet-to-be-discovered reserves in the world. And the cost of gas production in these explored and yet-to-be-developed fields is at around 60 to 70 cents. Thanks to northern conditions and ambient temperatures at -35, LNG takes less energy to produce. This means the production cost is lower, and as is the environmental footprint. It's good that the new US administration understands the region's potential. They have supported development of Northern Alaska, the resource base of which runs into something like 5 trillion cubic meters of gas. They are now considering an investment decision in an LNG project in Alaska, despite the need to build a 1,300-kilometer pipeline to enable it. What is also very important, they are engaging many international partners for the project. There's no doubt that over time these reserves will be developed by means of producing LNG and shipping with LNG carriers directly from the field. And when LNG prices go down, developing nations simply start to use LNG to replace coal-fired power generation. Let's look at India as an example, where the current gas share in the energy mix is to grow from 6% to 15%. Therefore, LNG supply glut is simply impossible, while a shortage is very much possible. Losing Russian LNG in the global gas balance will send prices through the roof, as was the case in 2021 and 2022. But then what is also very important, covering the future demand growth of 300 million tons of LNG is simply impossible without the Arctic reserves, and most of the reserves are located in Russia. Just like the American LNG projects in Alaska that require engaging a big number of international partners, covering the global demand requires cooperation in the Russian Arctic today. And I urge you to work towards this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mikhelson. And if you allow me, I would like to ask one clarification question. You clearly explained why we need to invest and why it is happening even now, taking into account the role of natural gas in this energy future of ours. And you specifically named where those resources are. But then it means that we need to invest in relations between countries. And what is interesting here, we can look at our past. Relations in the gas industry, and I'm head of the Association of European Business, cannot but speak about it. So this was the spine of gas relations. It was established in the 1970s. That was the time of detente, and the tensions were not that high. But at the same time, it was the end of the Cold War. Actually, we still had to wait for it. And now we are again at the time of conflict and disagreement. How can we invest in this future? Maybe it should begin even now, so that we can move forward along some different route and paradigm. Can you please share with us your vision on that? Can we do the same? Because in the past we saw that even when the relations were not their best.
So my speech, which I hope was not too long, I actually wrapped up with this main point that without international cooperation, developing the Arctic zone is almost an impossible task. And to avoid the crisis that some European nations are pushing everyone towards, we have to somehow split those matters. I'm not a specialist in political questions, in country relationship. I'm looking at this from the energy industry viewpoint. Discovering reserves, building a development plan takes years, 4 or 5 years at least. You have heard those numbers and the requirements for commissionings that need to take place in the coming decade or two, and this work needs to start today. And it was not in vain that I mentioned this example that the United States, for them probably, item number 1 today is the partnership in Alaska North Slope. I'm very certain that they will arrive to the conclusion that they don't need to build so many pipelines, that LNG carriers can do the job. And the American Arctic and Russian Arctic are very much similar, and it will definitely happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I fully agree with you. Obviously, take into account the role of the Arctic. It shouldn't become a new area of conflict and opposition. This should be the place where we can cooperate, and we should invest all our efforts in this. And we know Russia has enormous capabilities in the gas sphere, the state-of-the-art technologies and the resource base. All this will play an important role in developing this potential. At the same time, there are other energy areas where Russia has unique potential. And I would like to emphasize that Rosatom Corporation is one of the companies in the nuclear field which has been consistently developing and growing capabilities and competences and its know-how for all the stages of production, starting from extraction to construction of nuclear units, commissioning and decommissioning nuclear power plants. Now I would like to give the floor to Kirill Komarov, first deputy of and director of the block on investments and development of Rosatom Corporation. And my question to you, my first question to you is, how do you see the role of nuclear energy in the world energy mix in view of all those restrictions and requirements in the area of green economy, and especially at the time of turbulence? What about cooperation with our partners? So I mentioned 1.1 trillion investments in oil and gas and 2.2 trillion in renewables, and only 14% has been invested in nuclear. All right, definitely, we need to increase that. Thank you. Right. Thank you very much for inviting me. For me, it is a great pleasure to speak here. Right. This is the time of rapid changes and unique challenges, when traditional approaches to energy development and international partnerships require some new thinking. And I would like to share some thoughts with you. The main question the humanity faces now, this is how to ensure energy for the whole population. The demand for energy has been growing, and it is driven by growth of cities, urbanization, digitalization that requires data centers, and also diversification of transport and the energy transition. The global demand has been growing by 3.4% per year, and by 2050 the global consumption of energy will reach, there are different estimates of course, but it can at least double, and it will be 50 trillion kilowatt per hour. And this means that the whole world is now facing all these challenges: how to ensure reliable and clean energy to our populations. And without nuclear energy it is impossible. Energy is required in all geographical locations for diverse consumers. And currently, according to the IAEA data, over 730 million people, can you imagine, almost 13% of the population of the Earth do not have access to energy at all. And electricity should be available, it should be guaranteed, it should be reliable, and nuclear energy provides solutions to this. Every country identifies their own solutions and answers what is their energy mix. And I'm not going to speak about specific elements, whether it should be coal, gas or nuclear. Well, these are major sources of energy generations, and they are main right now, and they will remain central in the future. And this clean energy discussion is over now, so there are no doubts what means clean energy. Nuclear energy is part of the environmentally neutral sources of energy. Recently we had to prove that, and we required some collective answers to that. But now a consensus has been reached that the fully fledged energy transition is impossible without usage of nuclear energy. And the COP28 Conference of the Parties, it was in December 2023. For the first time in the history of those conferences, a decision was included into the resolution that nuclear energy should be developed as well. And by 2050 the nuclear generation will triple, and 130 companies all over the world joined this process. So we see that there's growing demand for energy coming from Rosatom in view of climate change, and we have a wide range of various solutions, whether it is of different capacity, but security, safety and reliability, these are major things we offer. And as I mentioned already, this year our nuclear energy is marking its 80th anniversary, and we can offer various solutions to our international partners. We have all reference projects, and they have proved to be reliable and safe. In Russia, the nuclear energy occupies 20%, and every fifth light bulb is lit by this, and sometimes 30 or 40% of electricity in different regions comes from nuclear. And mainly these are WWER reactors. These are major blocks and units of this is state-of-the-art technology. The first one was launched in 2015. It includes a so-called passive security systems, so no involvement of people is required. So even if there are no external power supply, so it can ensure that it will continue functioning, and it is protected from tsunami or any other natural disasters. And this type of reactors will be built and are being built in Turkey as well. You have observed already this trend that more and more consumers all over the world, they are interested in smaller reactors and modular solutions. Different countries are now having about 70 projects like that, and only Russia can provide all sorts of technical solutions for such generation. And the only floating power generation station is in Russia, and it works near Chukotka. And now we're building a whole fleet of such floating power plants, and also there are units for icebreakers and others. And Vladimir Putin, when he was in Tashkent, Rosatom signed the first small capacity nuclear power plant in Uzbekistan. And this is all a reality, so these are not projects on paper. Rosatom has remained company number one in terms of exporting NPP technologies. Our nuclear units are number one, and there's 41 nuclear units in 11 countries. And can you imagine, out of 25 nuclear units that are being built, 22 are built by Rosatom. This is 90% of the newly developed power plants. And all in all, in our history, 111 nuclear reactors were built, so every fifth in the world. And why different countries select Rosatom as their partner? The reasons are not only in the leading technology and state-of-the-art solutions, but because we ensure a comprehensive approach, and in the core of every project and our activities are the interests of our partners. And we are very flexible depending on the demands and ideas of our partners. We can ensure different configurations, and we can use only our own technologies and solutions, but we are flexible, and we discuss it very carefully, and we know how Russian nuclear reactors can be combined with French turbines and German control systems. And this is what is happening in Turkey, for example. We are using Russian turbines for Russia-provided nuclear power plant. And this is our enormous strategic advantage. And in Russia, we use only Russian components and technologies, but any partnership requires partners' relations. We need to be flexible. We need to offer different solutions, what our counterparts require. And the greatest foundation of ours is that we always follow all our obligations, whatever difficulties we might come across in the world. Rosatom has been working as a conveyor of leading technologies. We see that many countries express their interest in this, and today at this Verona Eurasian Economic Forum, I cannot but mention one of the key events of this year. It is the beginning of a large-scale project in Kazakhstan. And you know that for Kazakhstan it was not so easy to begin nuclear energy, so they had a referendum in the country, so they wanted to reach a national consensus in this respect. And now Kazakhstan is a leading partner of the international consortium, and on the 8th of August in Urgen the works were begun. And in Uzbekistan, our partners selected a different approach. There will be two different reactors, a large capacity and a smaller capacity, and the reliability of our technology is not the only argument in favor of Rosatom. When we come to different countries, and we actually help those countries to develop a nuclear industry in those countries. It involves infrastructure, specialist training, and development of local regulation, local production of equipment. And we even help them to ensure community involvement and approval, how information should be provided and disseminated, because people are scared when they don't see sufficient data. And in the context of multipolar world development, it is extremely important to ensure non-discriminatory access to new technologies. And in Moscow, there was the first global nuclear forum, and leaders of the countries were there, and it was chaired by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, and there were leaders from Armenia, Belarus, Myanmar, Ethiopia, Iran, Uzbekistan, Niger, and international organizations like IAEA and the World Nuclear Association. And the President of Russia identified three major principles for international cooperation in the multipolar world conditions. First of all, we need to reject the practice of so-called technological colonialism. No country should use their technological advantage to diminish the role of other countries, and it should not impose their conditions. And the sanctions and various restrictions, these are instruments of the past, and they cannot stimulate progress. They limit the exchange of technologies and experience. Second, it is access to leading technologies and innovations, including nuclear. This should be ensured for all peoples, and this includes not only clean energy, but also medicine and education. Then we will ensure sustainable development not only of some countries but the whole humanity. And the third is that the culture of trust and mutual respect should form the basis of this cooperation. We have been consistent in following all these principles in our relations with partners, and right now nuclear energy provides a number of advantages. First of all, the energy systems are developed because nuclear means reliable and intermittent supply for remote regions as well. Secondly, nuclear energy promotes diversification, and it develops new industries, related areas, and export opportunities. The third one, it is a specialist professionals training, because thousands of people are required to work in this. And the Minister of Energy from the Republic of Turkey was speaking about it. Hundreds of young engineers and other specialists have been trained in Russia, and now they work in nuclear energy as well. So there should be scientists and engineers. This will ensure solving of specific tasks, and all in all, it will ensure some solid, robust education and science framework for the new generations of specialists. And another one is that development of nuclear energy is critically important for all countries to ensure their energy sovereignty. And in developing the fuel and energy sector, we help those countries, and also we form the basis for future technological breakthroughs. Just a number of examples. Hungary, they began developing nuclear energy last century with support of the Soviet Union. There's a Faksh NPP, 40% of all energy in Hungary is generated there, and around it, there's machine building and equipment building industries, and they have their pool of suppliers, and a lot has changed. There's no more Soviet Union. But as soon as we began working on the project of new NPP construction in Hungary, all those specialists, they now see the next 100 years of future work, because it will be built and then will be operated for this period, and we see it as a great stimulus for development of Hungarian industry. And as I said, there are related areas. It is science, agriculture, medicine. In Belarus, we built the first NPP, and 40% of the generation is clean nuclear energy. And we also initiated a number of projects, and they all source from our competences and capabilities. And as I said, it is a wide range of areas. And now we are in Turkey, so we cannot but mention the AKU NPP. It is a very good example of this strategic partnership between Russia and Turkey for the next 100 years. And in participating of this project, we actually help Turkey to make sure that their dream comes true. And this is a large-scale project, and it is the largest NPP construction project in the world. And at the same time, 4 reactors, 5 gigawatt are being built, and 50 years. This is the designed capacity, and there will be 20 more years, the extension time. And this is a unique model because it is a build and operate model, and we are a provider and investor and the owner of this NPP, and this means that we guarantee its reliable work and investments, and we train all the personnel, and we are responsible for its safe operation. You see in these images how this has changed in the past 6 years. I would like to see one more image. Now you see this flat site, but at first there was a mountain, there was a hill, and this hill had to be removed, and over 30,000 people have been working there for 6 years. And now we are focusing the completion of the first reactor unit. All construction and assembly works have been completed, and the second, third, and fourth reactors are under construction. The energy generated there will be transported by 4 kilovolt lines to 6 transformer stations, and they will be part of the grid, and thousands of kilometers of these transport lines are being built. And you see, it is not only the nuclear power plant that should be finished. And this is an enormous impulse to develop industry and economy of Turkey. And now we see the beginning of a new branch, and it's a new industry, nuclear industry. And after launching, about 10% of Turkish energy will be produced there, and annually it will be about 35 billion kilowatt per hour, and this is enough for the whole Istanbul with 16 million people. And once again, I should emphasize that it is not just an energy-related project. We are sure that this NPP will contribute to economic development of Turkey, and people will have a new potential, possibilities, and a new future. And the AKU NPP has contributed a lot to social and economic development of the country, and 89% of 30,000 people are Turkish residents. And in addition to those jobs, there are more jobs because these people have to live somewhere, to eat somewhere, and one job at the construction site creates about 10 jobs in related areas, so you can easily multiply it.
And in fact, the reality turned out to be even better than we expected, despite the fact that this is the first nuclear power plant in Turkey, and we were very cautious in localization, making assumptions on how many Turkish companies would be ready to join and would qualify to act as contractors. So the bold plan was to have about 400 companies to participate. Right now there are more than 2,000 Turkish companies participating in the construction, and the scale of localization that was initially planned began to be at about 25%, right now amounts to 50%. So 50% of the project is done by Turkish companies. The nuclear power plant is not yet even commissioned, but we already paid more than $11 billion in taxes as revenue to the Turkish state budget. Obviously, despite the fact that those are Russian technologies, the nuclear power plant will be operated by Turkish citizens, and we therefore have a large-scale educational project. 320 Turkish students have graduated already and work at the Akkuyu nuclear power plant, and in total we plan to offer education to more than 1,000 experts. Hundreds of students from Turkey are studying, and when all 4 units are commissioned, we expect to have more than 4,000 people to work at the nuclear power plant. And gradually, as they get proper command of the technologies, most of them will become Turkish citizens. Minister Bayraktar talked about that today in detail. Now, Akkuyu NPP will largely contribute to Turkish achievement of its Paris Agreement goal to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 21%, and the NPP per se would prevent emissions of 18 million tons of CO2 equivalent annually. So this is a serious contribution to decarbonization. We are carefully watching to make sure we minimize any kind of impact on the environment. We have an ongoing environmental monitoring. We constantly conduct environmental campaigns, starting from cleaning up the beaches all the way to educational and awareness campaigns among local population. Just to name the few, lately next to the NPP construction site, we conducted international fishing competition, so that all those who love fishing from various countries could come and enjoy fishing and make sure from their own experience that nuclear construction is very safe. There is nothing to be worried about, unlike some cartoons like The Simpsons. So there is nothing to worry about, and we proved that fish is well protected and safe in the area. We obviously contribute to the infrastructure development in the region. There is more population relocating to the region. There is more economic activity happening. There are various educational and training centers evolving, sports facilities. We built road and tunnels and crossroads. The real estate market is going up. Hotel business is growing dramatically. This is a whole new life coming to the region that was before only focusing on agriculture. And of course, we operate as one single body with the rest of Turkish community around us. We're in touch with local communities. We support local civic initiatives. We contribute to infrastructure development. In all kinds of difficult times, we stay together hand in hand. During the time of pandemic, we developed a whole set of measures to prevent COVID outbreak. We were offering vaccination points, offering medical assistance, and supported hospitals around. On the 6th of February 2023, Turkey faced 2 severe earthquakes. One had a score of 8 points, the other one was 7.6. By the way, not a single facility was affected at the Akkuyu nuclear power plant, which shows that we built everything very reliably and securely, and all of our facilities are capable to stand earthquake with a magnitude of 9 points and more. And most importantly, we involved emergency workers of Russia to help those affected. 2,500 of constructors, workers, and a whole number of construction rigs were removed from Akkuyu power plant to offer assistance to those affected by the earthquake, to help with the excavation work and offer assistance. So we never stand aside whenever there is urgent situation and help is needed. We know that Turkey is facing high fire and wildfires risks, and we have our own firefighters, and we're ready to assist, not just at the construction site, but also in the province where we have presence. So, summing up, I wanted to say that nuclear industry is an example where we can unite and bring together advanced developments, principles of environment protection, human talent development, support to local communities, because today we are at the forum where we talk about the necessity of facilitating a dialogue, and by implementing projects like Akuyu nuclear power plant, we show that only through cooperation and joint movement to share knowledge, by showing respect towards sovereignty and cultural values of our countries, we can develop truly breakthrough solutions for the whole world by making nuclear energy and nuclear environment cleaner and people's lives better. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Komarov. Thank you for a very substantial presentation. I would like to address one additional question to you. You talked about large-scale projects that are ongoing despite all the difficulties and tensions in the geopolitical environment. You've also mentioned smaller projects, small nuclear units and floating reactors that are developing in the Arctic region. Please tell us, what is the role of the floating nuclear power plants and what is the role that they could play in other regions of the world? Do you have any plans to develop international cooperation in this area? Are you thinking about Africa or Asia? Well, small modular reactors in general are severely hyped and there are many speculations around them. Well, the truth is that electric power generated by small nuclear reactors can never be cheaper than the ones generated by large nuclear power plants. You always need to heavily invest in infrastructure, you need to invest in safety and security. However, the source of power generation is smaller. Therefore, there are more expenditures associated with this kind of power generation. However, there are many remote locations in the world that do not have access to the central power grid, and in that cases it does make sense to use that kind of solutions. Apart from that, there are many energy systems in the world that are by default fairly small. In Africa, there are many countries where the whole power grid is about 200-300 megawatts. Our typical power unit generates 1200 gigawatts. It's better to build 2 or even 4 nuclear units as we do it here in Turkey. So that kind of power generation would be considerably higher than the whole power grid of some small countries. And in case of small countries, small nuclear reactors do make a lot of sense. So if that is that kind of location that is remote, or maybe that is an island state, and the Arctic zone of Russia is a good example as well. Apart from the nuclear power plant that we've been operating for 5 years in Chukotka, we are building 5 more floating nuclear units for one of the largest copper reserves in Baim mine, and hopefully by the end of this decade it will be commissioned, and those 4 floating nuclear power plants will generate 400 megawatts of energy for it, because each floating platform has 2 nuclear units at 50 megawatts each. In Africa, there are many locations like that, and the matter of floating nuclear power generation is not new. And here in Turkey, there is a well-known company, Karadeniz, producing floating platforms that operate using diesel, gas and coal, and we firmly believe that this lineup would be added by solutions from the nuclear energy, because this world has a right to a reasonable energy mix that has to be a combination of several solutions, be that gas, nuclear or anything else, and each country should be allowed to decide and choose. It must be non-discriminatory, and then everyone will get access for sustainable development. Thank you very much.
We have now 2 experts speaking on key sectors of Russian energy production, Russian energy exports. And I would like now turn to our host country, Turkey, where our next speaker is uniquely positioned to guide us through the great reconfiguration that is taking place in the international energy landscape. And I would like to ask you, dear Professor Dr. Şahin Yaman, foreign trade expert and professor at the Middle East Technical University, whether you could share your perspective on what we are currently observing, the transition from a rules-based system to a power-oriented international system, how the strategic imperatives for a nation like Turkey to navigate this new reality look like. And then again, more focusing on energy, how new partnerships and supply chains are forging the multipolar energy order, and whether our global institutions can adapt to this accelerating energy transition, whether they will be fit to accompany the international energy cooperation in the 21st century. Would like to give the floor to you, and also for you, it's your choice whether you want to do it from your seat or whether you want to go to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for making me professor, but I'm only a doctor. Okay. Before starting and delving into the technicalities, I should like to thank first to the board and chairman of the Verona Economic Forum. I also thanks to Russian-Turkish businessmen associations in general. My thanks also goes to all the translators and the technical staff who made this wonderful organization possible. Mr. Chairman, in these days we are commemorating the inception of the Turkish Republic's 102nd anniversary. And having access to high quality translators and recalling our founding father Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's sensitivity to use Turkish language, and as a former Turkish state official, with your indulgence and permission, I wish to continue my presentation in my mother tongue. Where are the pointers? Point. Just.
Well, before I embark on my presentation, I would like to reiterate two important things which are important for me. Well, the first one is around 29 years ago, the Republic of Turkey sent me to Italy to study Russian economies and Soviet economies, and this is my 29th year after my graduation in Bologna. So regarding this, so we have Russian and Italian colleagues and bureaucrats and people, experts who are working in the energy field, and seeing all of you in my city of Istanbul, indeed, it's a great thing to see you all here. So, this is rather technical presentation from the nuclear energy and to the other aspects of the energy industry. But we have other experts who know of this much better than I do. So I would like to actually focus on my specialty, the critical, just like in the other critical raw materials, energy in the global economic system is a sub-function of the developments in the global energy industry. So right at the moment, in one century or in 3 centuries, a tectonic structural change is being experienced, which might be experienced in perhaps 3 centuries, 500 or 600 years ago, with the discovery of the different continents. And when there was a switch to the Atlantic, it changed everything. So after centuries, the system is being redefined. So Atlantic-oriented economic system is now shifting towards the Pacific. And in 1944, the so-called EU hegemony is actually coming to an end, and it's being collapsed. But what are the repercussions in terms of the energy? Let's dive into that. Well, as you know, in 1944, in New Hampshire, before the end of the Second World War, the global economic system regarding finance, development, and commerce, there was a framework, and there were three important institutions: IMF, which is regulating the short-term payments, and we have the World Bank, which is regulating the sort of the medium-term payments, and almost all of them have lost their functions to a great extent, especially in 2000s, where we started to have the hyper-globalization when it was at its peak. So it's sort of a reverse process which was kicked off. And about that, I would like to share a very small chronology with you. Over here, you see the geopolitical and economic factors and their interaction. And it has, to a great extent, has shaped our current reality. So the geopolitics, or say in terms of the security, where we had the peak of the globalization and then deglobalization and then coming back, or sort of, that one of the processes which was shaping this was the China's WTO accession in 2001, and in terms of security, Afghanistan occupation by the USA. And then after 7 or 8 years later, we start to see the global financial crisis. 2008 global financial crisis, including the energy demand, energy import, export, mining, minerals. It was a turning point for everything, because post 2008 we started to have a sort of a mercantilism and sort of a protectionism, which was never going back. And in terms of the Eurasia, one of the most important interactions or factors which was resulting is that the first Trump administration and its withdrawal from Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement in 2018. So this was sort of the gravity center of the global commerce was shifting towards Asia, and AI or embedded software oriented production was shifting to Asia, and the geopolitical gap which was created by the withdrawal of Trump administration from TPP. In 2020, there was a very interesting development. RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, inception took place in 2020. So it's a very comprehensive business cooperation partnership. For the first time, but it's very important, for the first time ever, China, the Republic of Peoples of China, started a process with Japan and South Korea, Australia and New Zealand. And within RCEP, RCEP, which started to become a center, and it started sort of a process of articulation with the rest of the world. And then in terms of the BRICS, even though the objections, despite the objections of the Federal Bank of USA, and they became a member. So in terms of the financial and the real current situation, these are very important contributing factors. Regarding the energy, I think this is one of the most important factors which is influencing the whole equation. And perhaps on the verge of, this is one of the reasons why we're on the brink of a nuclear war. The WTO, Doha development talks have collapsed, and starting with the Obama administration, the administration of USA, the systematic veto of WTO appellate by the appointment since Obama's era, culminating in 2019 when the last required judge was blocked, paralyzing the judicial function. So they vetoed the appellation, the designation of the judges. So it's sort of become dysfunctional or not able to function. So 80% or 90% of these cases were won by USA. And Cipolla, I would like to now refer to Cipolla, so because he talks about the irrational actions, the actions of the stupidity. And Cipolla says that within the scope of stupidity, there are some courses of action, and without any awareness, this is putting harm to everyone, regardless of wherever you're standing. So when the economic structure was shaped, the protectionism of the WTO, all of the reports in a cumulative fashion at an increasing rate, all of them were reports stating that the protectionism levels were increasing. And regarding the 2019 or 2018 progress forecast reports, they were all going downwards. And with the Trump administration and the trade wars, even that jargon and even that discourse started to put the global economy sort of into a guarding, a security-oriented guarding position. I'm not a great expert of energy, but in 2009 and in 2008 and 9, you know, the shale gas, which started to be very expensive, and I think that's one of the main reasons why we have the Ukraine war at the moment. But as a result of that, the Atlantic economy, the biggest economic bloc of the world, started to destroy one another, because on the transatlantic level there were, you know, mutual liberalization investments between USA and EU. They were feeding one another. But in 2008 or 9, for the first time ever, China with USA and Germany, it surpassed them forever. And USA and the West sort of they started to feel competition. Well, for example, we have a concept called MAGA, Make America Great Again. So I think there's sort of an inferior complex, so make it great again, which seems to have been reflected onto the discourse. Chipola again, referring to Chipola. All throughout the world, the withdrawal of the UK after the Second World War, even more dangerous, in my opinion, than that, the blocking of the WTO agreements and negotiations, and the export the import taxes on the rare minerals. It used to be 2.5, but now it's exiting 20%, as if it's in developing or emerging country, and pursuing a very protectionism-oriented policy is going to be accelerating and elevating the conflicts. So it's a reality that, so I'm not going to be repeating Mackinder projects or theories, but you know, the Eurasia, as we say, not only for China but in the East Asia becoming a geopolitical center, and in terms of the commodity and goods, from electronics to the steel, from the defense industry to the chemistry, in every spectrum of the in every spectrum of the trade, it has become sort of a commercial hub. But you know, USA and EU has also the services industry, where they are excelling. You know, USA has an export of $2 trillion, China and Hong Kong it's 4.5, but in USA we have the export of 1 trillion, and it's one of the very significant factors which is impacting the whole equation. And in the upcoming times, the political equation is going to be on focusing on tourism, transportation. So it's very much going in that direction of the services industry. Very probably. So, you know, the economic cooperation and increasing the East-West partnership in Eurasia, RCEP agreement is of pivotal significance, in my opinion. Why is it important? Because in AUKUS, or in the Pacific, in some geopolitical regions, the South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Korea. So these are sort of the gravitational centers. So, for example, in terms, apart from the semiconductors, Asia can do everything almost at all times. And introduction of these countries into RCEP, when we have recovered in terms of the balance with USA and EU, I think it's going to result in very peaceful situation. So regarding the purchasing power parity, so in BRICS, the GDP of USA has been surpassed. So when we look at the current situation which we face vis-a-vis the trade wars, or you know, the unforeseeable modus operandi of Trump in terms of the consistency, it's very important in the forecastability, foreseeability of tariffs in terms of the conflicts, or you know, the mitigation of the conflicts. This is one of the most important things. So binding, or you know, the clarity of the tariffs is of pivotal importance. And you know, USA seems to be destroying all. So the appellate of the judges And just like in the 18th century, so we have the American, one of the founders of Korea, Alexander Hamilton, which are among the founders of the American system. So, you know, making a reference to the economic nationalism and, you know, a major economy, the major economy stepping into this equation, and this negative interaction with the rest of the second and the third major players, it's shaping everything. So the global demand is very important. When you have a reduction in the global growth, everything else is very much impacted and triggered by that. So I would like to talk about these things, but which is very visible to the naked eye, and I'm sure you're all familiar with these aspects. So the hegemony of USA in you know, this is very much something studied in the literature. There was never an American hegemony on the Western system. There was this dominance because China, Soviet Union, India, so many other countries were not involved in that. But let's accept that as an economical system, Bretton Woods and USA, they were the most important determinants of the system. But now that system has collapsed in Cancun, in WTO agreements. Maybe in 1998 Seattle anti-globalization protest, it came to a collapse. And I have my doubts, you know, who collapsed what. But, you know, if and when the real economy is collapsing, we will lose finance and the trade, you know, with tanks, or, you know, if you can't enter a place with tanks or artillery, then you can enter those places with drones. So I think they're going towards a multipolarized system. And, well, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a perfect and the polarized, I think it has to do with the terminology. We need to correct that. It's a rather problematic expression. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be problematic. However, I believe it's going to be better than this system. Normatively speaking, learning our lessons from the 20th century, the different sizes of countries need to revisit the WTO model. Despite everything, WTO, you know, was the most democratic organization, despite the contrary beliefs of the world. So the multipolarized system, BRICS, Brazil, you know, with the increase of BRICS, and nominally speaking, they surpassed the rest of the world in terms of the PPP, and from Mexico, from Canada, and technologically speaking, it's much more advanced in terms of the semiconductors or conductors. This is becoming a very significant region, and this is going to be so in the city states of Italy, and I studied at Cyprus, by the way, and you know, most of the cities are actually taking after the Venice style, and everyone shall be willing to share. And I think in that case, EU and USA are going to play a very significant role. Very briefly, I would like to talk about historical anecdote. When you establish a new system, you know, our founding father of the Republic of Turkey, I also would like to take this opportunity to commemorate our founding father, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and his brothers in arms. And the Great Depression in 1929, you know, Wall Street crisis, but Sumter and Hawley, two American senators, they significantly increased the customs duty. The real economy was shrinking, and, you know, there was a shrinkage by more than 80%. I don't know the real statistics, maybe it's 90%. And likewise, the stock exchange, if America sneezes, and then the rest of the Europe, they become down with flu, and then Mussolini, Hitler, and all the other countries actually follow suit. But the sterling, the pound was in crisis, and, you know, in 1917 in Gallipoli, when Nusret ship, the artillery ship, just make the British sank, they made them sink. Therefore, the Brits actually, they lost themselves and they couldn't be recovered. So in that, between Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, you know, and the conflicts in 1932 in Geneva, Kindleberger says Geneva, but I think there was a mistranslation. In Geneva, there was an international financing architecture conference which took place, and Kindleberger's famous book, Great Depression, and it has 2 footnotes. And Turkey, back then, League of Nations or ILO, our president worked there downstairs, and you know President the building very well. The Turkish delegation has 2 financial, they proposed to establish 2 major economic organizations, and with Kindleberger's footnote, CD, footnote for the formation of embryonic international monetary fund proposed by the Turkish government. That's the footnote that we say. And also International Credit Development Bank, World Bank, as we know today.
Effendi, I think we are getting a bit into trouble with time.
Finalizing?
If you could come to the conclusion, what this means for the energy multipolar order.
Okay,
So,
I'm
yes.
finishing. I just give this example. 12 years before the formation of the Bretton Woods system, Turkey proposed this proposal with the ILO, Belgium, and Poland to provide finance for everybody, not for the north or south. It's a kind of mix, bridging the gap between different sides. And I strongly believe that sorry, I'll keep in Turkey. Yeah.
Well, when we are going towards a multipolarized system, so between China and America in the recent developments, I think we are going, especially in rare elements, rare minerals, and in the other fields, I think, we are taking realistic steps, and I think it's very positive. And in the upcoming times, I do hope that we're going to be seeing more of these future developments, positive developments, because, without USA or EU in this multipolarized system, it's out of the question. Everyone has to take on their responsibility, and with a constructive mindset, so not conflicting, but agreeable in an amicable fashion. Everyone has to use their tools. Again, I would like to refer to an economist, the thick book theory. So he says that every era has their thick book. Marx, The Capital, Adam Smith, or Keynes. So I think in the upcoming times, in this multipolarized version, the agreement, or we have to have a modality of multilaterality, the BRICS, EU, USA, everyone has to be there. And we have to be sharing, we have to be egalitarian, and we have to have a fair approach. And it's not 100% doable, but everyone embarking on this journey has to put on their best efforts. And thank you so much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Şahin Yaman Effendi, for this very thought-provoking and keynote, and for putting things into perspective. And I think you rightly reference also to the rich past experience of the Turkish Republic and its founding father of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And the holiday that you just celebrated. And I would now like to turn to our fourth speaker, k našemu četvrtemu speakeru.
And now I would like to move over to our fourth speaker, Konstantin Simonov, CEO of the Foundation of Energy Security. Konstantin Vasilyevich, it's not the first time when we discuss energy security with you. Every year we try to monitor what is happening, what are new trends. And looking back at our past, the past 3 or 4 years, what are the major trends you can identify? Trends that move us towards the energy future. What are the major challenges we are facing? What is your perspective on that? Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you very much. For me, it is a great pleasure to speak here in front of you. I would like to thank the Konstantin Eurasia Association and the whole team of the organizing committee. Every year they do so much, and really all this is so well organized, and it is a great platform for sharing opinions. And we would like to thank the hosting party. Yeah, definitely there's the special energy of having this in this beautiful palace. Right, let's have a look at the changes in the world energy sector. And actually it's not just the last 4 years, but about 10 years. Very often, when we discuss global political aspects, they say that right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had the era of the rule-based politics. And when we speak about economy, they say that we managed to develop the global economy, and the energy sector is part of that, because we saw that global energy markets were developing, and it was obvious at the oil market, and it was clear how oil is traded and what are terms and conditions and benchmarks. And because of natural gas development, they were saying that there will be a global gas market with all the new pipelines connecting regions. And now what we see, it is the whole collapse of this system, as this rule-based economy and rule-based energy, because it was part of it. And this is thanks to all the actions by those states who are trying to convince how bright this world is. And we traditionally call it the collective West. There are nuances, of course, because the Western countries are quite different. But I believe we need to speak about these 6 strategic eras made by European countries and Western countries in the area of energy. The first 2, they are related to the attempts of the European Union to create a certain vision of the future and to impose that vision on everyone. It is an energy, a snobbish position. They had just one image of the future and they were promoting it, but only due to their own interests. A big question is whether everybody achieved that, and China actually underestimated the production of solar panels and electric vehicles, because the idea was that in terms of renewables the whole world should use Western technologies, but something went wrong there, and natural gas was discriminated, and partly nuclear energy as well. We heard about changes in the sphere, but for a long time nuclear was excluded from this carbon neutral proposals and projects. One question I continue repeating: if the European Union worries a lot about climate change, why don't they calculate the aftermath of the sanctions outcomes? Right, we see now that all the transportation routes are different, and if they purchase fuel from China and India, the carbon footprint is enormous, definitely. Right, and there's an important verb in English, to weaponize, and weaponizing energy. They used to say that Russia has been turning gas into an energy weapon, and this term was coined in the West. But now they are doing this. They are weaponizing this sector, and we see all the sanctions and restrictions imposed on Russia And one of the brightest examples of that is the Nord Stream explosions. And until now, we haven't heard the appropriate response to it. Italy, for example, at some point, okay, they agreed to extradite one of the people involved. Then they said no. Now probably again they will extradite him. But we expect Germany to have an appropriate court hearing of all this, because if we speak about weaponization of energy, this is the best example of it. And when we read in the Western media that maybe there will be terrorist attacks on the Turkish stream as well, so we cannot just continue looking at it quietly.
So sanctions, and by the way, here on the slide, you can see the correspondence of two foreign ministers, one of Hungary and response of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary is asking, what are we going to do about those who've exploded the Nord Stream? One of them is in Poland. And the Minister of Poland responds that they were correct to conduct this sabotage, and I can only hope that they would do the same to the Druzhba pipeline. So that's the way the European Union sees this situation. Now, a few words on the sanctions. Mr. Mikhelson commented on the latest package of European sanctions against Russia. The 19th sanctions package cancels those contracts that have already been made. Those are LNG short-term supply contracts, both short-term and long-term. So generally speaking, the European Commission and the ministers of the European Union are openly stating that their decisions have the force to terminate earlier made contracts. And by the way, soon they will make it to the pipeline gas, because the Repower Europe plan foresees complete cancellation of Russian gas, and a number of pipeline gas of Gazprom go beyond 2028. Nonetheless, the European Commission believes that its decisions have a right to cancel contractual law. And you can see the principle of Roman law, pacta sunt servanda. The contracts are to be complied with. Apparently, it's no longer a rule for Europeans. And here on the chart, you can see how Russia responded to sanction limitations. The numbers are well known. We've made an estimate on what is the percentage of crude oil, and this is statistics for crude oil coming from Russia. In 2019, about 50% of Russian export of crude oil was going to the European Union. Well, we all know that it changed now, and most of it is coming to India. 45% of our export now is going to China, 40% to India, and by the way, a very noticeable growth of supplies to Turkey. 7% of crude oil export from Russia is going to the Republic of Turkey. The Russian exports survive, I would say, oil export on whale, because Russian word for whale is kit, and that's an acronym for China, India, and Turkey. I'm looking right now into the windows, and I see the oil tankers carrying Russian oil through the Bosphorus. You can't win over the market. Market economy always wins. And you can see the structure of oil imports for India and China. 40% of oil imports for India are coming from Russia, and you may impose new sanctions and tariffs, but how can possibly India substitute 40% of its oil imports without any kind of colossal economic losses is unclear. Now, Chinese market, our share accounts for about 18%, but that is 2 million barrels per day. That's crude oil only, and those are huge volumes. And by the way, please note, I'm coming to an end soon, I promise, but please note that both India and China are getting their oil from those countries that we normally call the Global South. This is an important remark, and I will relate to that later. Now, a few words on Turkey. Our energy relations with Turkey are evolving actively. And just to cite an example, those are the charts showing oil supplies, and you can see the growth experienced in 2023, and that's coming on top of crude oil. We see growth in 2023, 2024, and we can see Q1 year-on-year comparison. We keep increasing all petroleum exports to India, and India is actively supplying diesel to European Union. In fact, this is huge amount of money that India is making through Russian imports. And obviously Russia is also benefiting from that. India has become a big market for us. Now let's look at the gas market. In first half of 2025, supply of gas from Russia versus Q1 of 2024 went up by almost 30%, plus 2.4 billion cubic meters, 11 billion supplied in the first half of the year to Turkey. So we hear that India is making contracts to supply. Oh, sorry, Turkey is entering into contracts for US supplies of LNG. Turkey is an independent country, can choose its own suppliers. But obviously, in a fair competition, Russian gas supplies or oil supplies would obviously win fighting for Turkish market, and Turkey understands as well. Now, as for nuclear energy, we talked a lot about that. I'm not going to reiterate. Since the time is running out, I'm only going to say a few words to wrap up. So, what are the countries of the Global South to do? Professor Faleka, in his extraordinary introductory remarks, mentioned that the policy of the global majority or the Global South is not against the West. So it's just that we are no longer with the West, but we are not against the West. It wasn't our choice. It was the decision made by the Western countries. And the same applies to the energy sector. We used to be part of the global energy markets. We played by the rules. We were ready to compete fairly. Back when we had cooperation with Europe, we were always saying we are ready to compete for your markets, but please let us compete fairly. Today, Europeans are no longer ready to do so. The Europeans have destroyed and abandoned the rules they have created. Russia has been a very responsible supplier, and even in 2022, when many in Russia were saying that we need to proactively stop supplying gas to Europe, myself, being a participant of many TV shows, was always stating publicly Russia needs to comply with its contractual obligations. It's a matter of reputation, and Gazprom has done so. Gas for rubles doesn't mean that the contracts are terminated. It would change nothing for European buyers. They had an opportunity to continue buying gas from Russia, and that was a backup option regarding the potential arrest or seizure of revenue and profits that was needed. But nonetheless, we see that European Union proactively refused from that by destroying and violating the principles of its own existence. In this regard, the Global South is not going to be left without energy carriers. Russia and other suppliers are ready to ensure its energy security, but the global majority needs to realize that these countries are capable of defining and shaping its own energy future and defining the rules of the game for its market. It's not easy. There is a certain habit that we have all developed, but nonetheless, if we are forced to live without the Western countries, and it is the choice of the Western countries, we still need to understand, while Brent oil is the major label on the market, a major type of oil available on the market, what should be the new format of LNG contracts and pipeline gas? Those are the matters we can and should be discussing, but most importantly, we have to be aware of our own intellectual potential and power. And we have to understand that that kind of scenario would be a bad scenario. Back in 2020, I was saying that the world may split into two parts, representing different views on the energy present and energy future. Just lately, we had the Russian Energy Week in Russia, and Deputy Prime Minister Novatek published an article just ahead of it, saying that there may be two energy fortresses built in the world. But this is an extreme scenario. Nonetheless, we are ready for this scenario. We are willing to come combat energy poverty and any kind of poverty, and energy carriers are playing a vital role in this regard. We're ready to build a new economy because the Europeans themselves, and I was talking about the sixth mistake they've made, they've underestimated the energy capacity and intensity of the new economy, and they were surprised to find out that AI is consuming so much energy. We warned them about it, and Turkey is showing it by example. AI is developing actively, data centers are being built, desalination projects are evolving. We are in the global south are willing to improve the quality of life and live better lives, while the West is encouraging us to follow the principle, we've enjoyed our good lives, you are not going to enjoy those, because you have to think about climate agenda. Let us think about climate agenda together, and let us try to improve the quality of lives for the peoples of the global south by ensuring affordable and reliable energy sources. Russia has proven to be a reliable energy supplier, and you can be assured that all of the energy projects of yours will have a solid foundation to develop. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, Mr. Simonov.
Running out of time.
Evet efendim.
It's time to sum up and to draw some conclusions. I think the distinguished panelists of this energy session have shared some very deep analysis of what is happening in the global energy markets, of the challenges international cooperation is currently facing in the energy sphere. We have a very clear map that neither the demand side challenges that we face in energy nor the supply side challenges can be overcome without international cooperation. I think we have heard from all participants of this panel that in principle there continues to be a readiness for international cooperation, and that for me is the most important message. Yes, we are living currently through very difficult times. Yes, we talk most about what divides us than about what brings us closer. But to hear a message from key stakeholders, from key industry players, that there is a continued readiness to address these challenges together, to overcome them together, makes me, and perhaps I'm a professional optimist, still confident that we will find ways talking together. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for sharing your insights. And now we continue with the next session, Global Change and its Impact on the Business Environment, and I hand over to Vittorio Rosario Petrocelli.